Today I have a guest, so we'll see. And we're down to 58, 29, 24. And also, basically we're talking about Syria and possibly North Korea, depending. But those are the two most urgent things that affect us now. And it's down to 4, 3, 2, 1. And hey, folks, how are you? Good Saturday to you. I hope, like myself, you folks are starting to enjoy this decent weather that we're having. Hopefully, it's going to maintain itself like this and get a little better. But we here at the Concerned Forum always wish you the best, weather-wise. And speaking about the weather, I wonder what the weather is like for our bomber pilots over there in the Eastern Med, where President Trump has our guys and gals gleefully bombing away, supposedly at a Syrian Air Force base. When I see things like what we're doing now taking place, it really reminds me of when I was in the first Gulf War. And, we've been at war quite a long time. And I thought that we just elected a guy that said we shouldn't participate in these Middle Eastern civil wars. As a matter of fact, up until about 5 days ago, that's exactly what he was saying. Now, for some odd reason, he changed. Now, we hear that it's supposed to be because he saw the bodies of the little Syrian children that have been exposed to some type of chemical warfare. Now, I find that very strange. And as a parent, I stress also when I see pictures of children anywhere in the world being hurt, having to live through war and chaos. But the funny thing is, or maybe I use the wrong term, the ironic thing is that this is the same guy, our president, that said that these same little children who he sees dying in a picture coming from Syria, well, he didn't trust them to come inside any Western country. Not only did he not want any of them to come into the United States, he felt it was wrong for them to come into Britain, Germany, France. Yet now, all of a sudden, just like I said, he claims to be bombing them so that he can rescue them. And when I say bombing them, I mean Syria. Now, initial reports say that we really haven't done any damage, that he gave Russia, and by turn Syria, full warning that we were coming. You could say it was almost like a show bombing. Well, what else could it be? If I tell you, hey, I'm going to hit you in your jaw in approximately 6 minutes, and I'm going to try and kick your friend in the leg a minute after that, that's giving advance warning. So why, if he's trying to make such a statement, he decides to notify Russia and in turn the Syrians? Well, of course, we don't want to get into a confrontation with Russia, but then what is the sense of us being involved in their civil war in the first place? Trump has just done what he is so good at doing, confusing the issue. Now, since he is in such a mood where his heart is just bleeding over with love and concern for these poor children, in Syria, maybe he'll lighten up on the prohibition of allowing people coming from the war-torn part of the Middle East to be able to come here for refuge. We can only wonder. Now, today, I have a very interesting friend. I've known him for quite a few years now, Mr. Tom Siracuse. And this gentleman had the opportunity to serve in the U.S. Navy for 2 years, and he also did 2 years in the Peace Corps. How many of you folks out there remember Jack Kennedy and his Peace Corps? Well, Tom was one of those people. He has a poli-sci degree from the University of Connecticut, and he also has a master's degree. And he also taught English in the New York City public school system, taught English as a second language. And when he finally decided to retire, he still wanted to be active, and so he joined the Green Party, and he was, for a while, he was the chairman of the Manhattan Green Party. And this gentleman is my good friend, Tom Siracuse. Tom, tell me, let's get your opinion on what happened with the bombing of Syria.
Well, I think that you touched upon it about the sort of halfway effort regarding this bombing.
Yeah.
And the relationship between the Trump administration and the Putin administration.
Yeah.
When you really ask this question, this bombing the other day, who does it really benefit? And I would say it benefits both Trump and Putin. On the one hand, you have Trump, his polling among the American people is pretty low.
Yeah.
And by standing up to the Russians, who he has been accused of trying to being under their influence, by doing this, he has scored a lot of points that he's willing to stand up to the Russians.
Macho.
In fact, much of the Democratic leadership in Congress is congratulating him on this. You called it a show. I happen to agree with you there, by the way. And on the other hand, Putin, who's also having a big problem with the Russian public, there are demonstrations going on. His popularity has gone way down. He has shown that he could stand up to Trump and to the American superpower. So those two men actually have benefited, I think, from this recent charade. Unfortunately, innocent men, women, and children have gotten killed, although this is nothing new. Do you know that according to the UN statistics, over 450,000 people have lost their lives, mostly Syrians, since the beginning of this civil war in Syria in 2011?
Yeah.
Or over 8 million people have been internally displaced in Syria. Another 2 million people have been forced to flee the country. That comes to 10% of the entire population of Syria, which I believe is around 20 million.
Right.
I asked you before the program what the population of the United States was. And you said 350 million
Yeah,
people.
about 350
So
million.
can you imagine a situation in the United States in which 35 million people have been displaced, turned into refugees, or killed?
Yeah.
And what is this all about?
Well, sorry, yeah.
When we have a chance, I'd like to just give a very short thumbnail history of Syria since it became an independent country.
Now, before we do that, let me say that those of you who know me well, you probably already know that Tom Siracuse and myself have been friends for years. The only thing is, for you folks out there that don't know this, for a short time I was a member of the Green Party for about 3 or 4 years. And then I left the Green Party and I went back to the Democratic Party. And him and some other folks in the Green Party, they're all, good friends, but they never miss the opportunity when they catch Democrats doing something wrong or, silly, they never pass up an opportunity to just, give me a little tweak about it. And this is one of those times because I think that what the Democrats should do is basically hold their comments on this this bombing business, number one, and number two, continue with the investigation about him being under Russian influence, and basically demand that he comes to Congress for any future military interventions. And those are the three things that Democrats should be doing. Now, I'm going to let Tom give us his little background into just what's going on in Syria and how it happened. Please, go ahead.
Well, like I said, let's go back to when Syria became an independent nation. Before World War I, that whole area, the Middle East, including present-day Turkey, Syria, Iraq, the Arabian Peninsula, Jordan, Palestine,
Yemen,
and the whole Arabian Peninsula was all part of what was known as the Ottoman Empire, which was dominated by the Turks. And during the beginning of World War I, the Ottoman Empire, which was being threatened on all sides, particularly by Russian, French, and British encroachments. They had already, in 2 years before World War I, they had lost almost all of their territory that they had controlled in the Balkans. They decided to side with the Germans in World War I.
Right.
Well, of course, they lost. After World War I, President Wilson pushed this idea of self-determination of nations.
Right.
And he specifically had in mind those Arab nations that had been part of the Ottoman Empire, as well as many European groups setting up countries like an independent Yugoslavia.
Oh, yeah.
And things like that. Anyway, however, this determination principle did not extend to the British and French empires.
How about that? Wonder why.
In fact, there was a rebellion in Ireland during the war,
That's right.
1916. And so after the war, the British had the opportunity to extend self-rule to the Irish. That didn't come until later. But so the French and English had a different plan for those provinces that had been under the control of the Ottoman Empire. they decided to divide those Arabic provinces among themselves. Syria, which in those days included Lebanon, that would go to France. Palestine, Jordan, and Iraq, that would go to England.
Right.
And Saudi Arabia was sort of was going to sort of a joint control by England and the United States. And an important factor in all of this was oil. By the end of World War I, it was obvious to the industrialized nations that oil was going to be the main source of fuel. And England and France in those days did not have much oil. The United States did. And so they wanted to get they wanted to control the oil of the Middle East. So that happened after World War I.
Right.
They had their puppets, the French and the English, in those Arab countries. After World War II, the French wanted, and the English wanted to reestablish their dominance in the Middle East, but those two wars, World War I and especially World War II, had so weakened France and England that they were really not able to do this.
Yeah.
And somebody said that the United States was the nation that sacrificed the least and gained the most from World War II. We were never invaded, our infrastructure was never destroyed, and so we opposed any French efforts to reestablish its control over Syria. And the Syrians elected a government that turned out not to be under the control even of the United States. A new Syrian government was opposed the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine, and it also opposed the building of Arabian American Amoco pipeline that would lead from Arabia through Syria to the Mediterranean. And of course, this did not set well with the United States. And Truman engineered one of the first, if not the first, CIA coup to overthrow the Syrian president, who was a nationalist, al-Kuwatli.
Oh, right.
And we put a military general, Zaim, in power, and he in turn was overthrown. And a 6-year struggle ensued in Syria, and Kuwatli finally regained control in 1958. Now, in 1955, in 1958, Syria and Egypt under Nasser organized a joint republic called the United Arab Republic, and they opened up relations with the Soviet Union. If you remember, the Soviet Union was given the contract to build the Aswan Dam. Right. That also did not sit well with the United States.
A lot of things don't sit too well with us. Notice that?
I wonder why. So the later, when that UAW, United Arab UAR, United Arab Republic, dissolved with the death of Nasser, the secular Ba'ath Party
Yeah.
took over the governments of both Syria and Iraq. Now, the Ba'ath Party, they were nationalistic,
Right.
and the present Syrian president, his father Hafez al-Assad,
Oh, yeah.
he became president, and he in 1971, and for almost 30 years, he was president of that country, and he had established a close relationship with the Soviet Union, and allowing them to have a naval base there. While after his father died in 2000, what's his name, Bashar al-Assad, he succeeded his father, continuing this dictatorship.
Right.
Now, in 2011, students began to protest this dictatorship. And these protests eventually grew, and they were supported by the West to overthrow this pro-Soviet dictatorship in Syria. So that whole thing, Syria was caught up in this proxy war. On the one hand, you had Russia and Iran supporting the Assad government. And on the other hand, you had the United States with its allies in Europe and in the Middle East, such as Saudi Arabia, supporting the overthrow of that government. This whole thing resulted in such a chaos in Syria that it gave the opportunity to Al-Qaeda and ISIS to move in there, which they were not in there before.
Right.
And so now we bring the situation up to what it is now, where millions of people have been displaced. By the way, this refugee problem, not only from Syria, of course, but from other countries that the West has intervened in, like Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Somalia, and now our support of this brutal dictatorship in Saudi Arabia, which is destroying Yemen, has resulted in millions and millions of people flooding into Europe and causing all kinds of political problems there, including the growth of foreign feeling, anti-immigration, and right-wing growth in Europe. So here we have this problem, and I pose this question. I think that this whole thing has to do with multinational capitalism, its quest to extend its markets overseas, and its necessity to control resources overseas, particularly oil. And the question is, now you mentioned that Trump said during his election that we should not continue to engage in regime change and these constant wars, and we should
That's what
try.
he said.
He said that, and we should try to initiate a better relationship with Russia. However, I think we can come to the conclusion that whatever Trump says, you really can't take seriously. It's all rhetoric. And in fact, my question is this. can this country or any superpower that is really a capitalist economy, can it really survive without these constant wars, without imperialism? That, to me, is the root problem of what's going on in the world today.
Okay. I hear what you're saying. And those years I spent in the White House and the Pentagon actually studying the history of these places and what we're doing nowadays, a lot of questions rise up. Here goes one for you. Well, if the West just completely pulled out of the Middle East, those people would probably hack themselves to death, and you would see more dead bodies of dead children. Now, I'm playing devil's advocate here. But see, those are the things that are constantly brought up. I've seen and heard these same kind of questions raised at certain staff meetings, at certain briefings that I was responsible for. Basically collating all the various bits and pieces of information, presenting it to the intelligence officer or that civilian intelligence person. And these are some of the questions that come out of that. Okay, everybody, let's just pull out of Syria. Well, they're going to say, you see what's happening in Syria now. What do you think would happen if there was absolutely no pressure from the outside world? How bad it would be, especially for those children. Now remember, I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm telling you the things that I heard when I was the one that was inside the briefing room, okay? That's one. Another one is, what are you going to do about ISIS? Now, at my time, which was the 80s and 90s, you didn't have ISIS, but it was still the same thing, okay? Whether you're talking Muslim Brotherhood or what have you. And the question would be, what do you want to do with a group that's spreading all over the Middle East and parts of Africa, and they're determined in their own mind to take the world back to what it was in the 800s and 900s, when you actually did have an Islamic caliphate, the Empire of the Two Shores, when Muslims ruled Spain, Portugal, and a part of France, as well as Africa, down to the middle of Africa, and east, going all the way into Russia. And that's what these people in ISIS, this is what they claim they want. So what do you do? And remember, I'm devil's advocate here. I got my opinion, which I'll eventually put out there. But for right now, I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, let's compare the situation in the Middle East, say, recently, before the United States took direct action in Afghanistan, the overthrow of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, the overthrow of Gaddafi in Libya, and the attempted overthrow of Assad in Syria. What was the situation there? It's certainly an argument can be made that it was better, despite all of those dictatorships, than what it is today after our intervention there. I mean, as ISIS and Al-Qaeda were not a threat in Iraq under Saddam Hussein, under Gaddafi in Libya, or under Assad in Syria. There was not this wholesale bloodshed and civil war going on, in which millions of people were are being killed or fleeing the area. So this claim that if we didn't go in there, the thing would be worse, I would make the opposite claim, that we have actually made the situation worse by going in there. Now, I'm not saying that we should just become total isolationists and ignore the rest of the world. That's an impossibility. But I would like to point out, remember I mentioned this Noam Chomsky on Democracy Now! The other day. He pointed out that that 5 years ago, the Russians approached the United States and proposed a negotiations with the Assad government to gradually bring in a coalition government, and eventually Assad would have to leave, and at that time it was the Obama administration refused to go along with that. Maybe the Obama administration felt that they didn't want to give the Russians that kind of diplomatic influence in the Middle East. But there certainly are other alternatives to the situation in the Middle East than what is going on now. What's going on now is resulting in a bloodbath that is approaching what happened during World War II.
Yeah, that is true.
So what happened to diplomacy? Some people say, "Oh, you can't talk to
you can't
Saddam.
reason with
You
the
can't
people in the
reason
Middle
with
East.
us,
They're
Saddam
crazy,
Hussein, right?
you know,
You can't talk to
That's the
Hamas
BS.
and
Yeah.
the Palestinians. They're beyond reason.
Beyond redemption.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
madmen. They just want to chop
But
off
on
heads.
the other hand, we eventually wind up talking, and we do talk to these people
Yeah, of course.
secretly anyway.
Yeah.
But so the question is, why is it then that the United States has decided to embark on this militaristic imperialism? Who does that really benefit? It doesn't benefit you and me.
No.
It doesn't benefit the American people. In fact, our economy, despite all of this militarization, is very fragile. Anything could set off a downturn, like what happened in 2008.
Yeah.
So who benefits? Well, of course, we know that the weapons industry benefits a lot. These contractors benefit. I mean, who benefited from our occupation of Iraq? But but these contractors and friends of the Bush administration and Cheney and all of these guys. And same thing now. Who's benefiting from all of this? And unfortunately, the American public has been sold a bill of goods that somehow it is our responsibility to be the world policeman to protect the world against this worldwide terrorist threat. Because if we don't do this, those terrorists are going to come over here. Well, I would make the argument that our foreign policy actually is causing so much hatred in the Middle East that we are contributing to this terrorist attack. And as far as terrorism goes, you know what Martin Luther King said at Riverside Church regarding the Vietnam War.
Yeah, I was there.
That the United States is the
Greatest purveyor of
the
violence.
greatest purveyor of violence in the world.
Okay,
We
now-
have to we have to embark on another policy.
Well, okay, I understand what you're saying. To a large extent, oh, we gotta watch out for our table here.
Oops.
To a large extent, I agree with you. But now we're in a situation. You see, this is what is so dangerous about being, the military always being the first option that you reach for. Because what people who want to see us continually involved in that part of the world militarily, something will happen, something will come up, and that will be their excuse. And then once the rounds start flowing back in our direction, once we're getting clipped, in other words, suppose Syria fired off a long-range missile and hit one of those destroyers that was firing the Tomahawks at their airfield. Well, once that happens, then it's like a part of the mind, and many of these folks, especially Republicans and conservatives, it will shut down. The question period is over. See, once the bullets start flying back at us, then you're not supposed to ask any more questions. Hey, we've been shot at.
Let's all get behind the president now.
Yeah, let's all get behind
right.
which is crazy. And I tell you, quite frankly, I think that, knowing what I know about the internal workings of the Pentagon, I think you would have to be a damn fool to follow this guy, Trump, without asking any questions. You'd have to be ridiculous. You'd have to be crazy. Because remember, that's going to be your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife, your grandchildren, your nieces and nephews, your cousins that will be over there. Do you know we have hundreds and hundreds of troops over there now? Of course, it doesn't get too much coverage in the press, but they're there. Now, how do you think they feel? I know how they feel. Okay? I've been the tip of the spear a few times in my life. It's not a pleasant feeling, believe me. Especially now when you have a president that sometimes he carries himself in such a manner, you wonder how this guy is able to get out of bed in the morning. And he puts his sole faith and confidence in his son-in-law. Most people don't even like their sons-in-law, But this guy has put his son-in-law in command of the foreign policy of the United States, of the domestic policy of the United States, and you have to wonder where it stops. And the only other thing that's comforting about, what's that kid's name? Jared? The son-in-law, Trump's son-in-law.
I don't remember now.
Well, the only the most comforting thing about his daughter and son-in-law being so included into the mechanism of American foreign and domestic policy is that, Trump he wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning to, to use, Twitter, right? Well, what happens one morning, and it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and he decides to call the young person that walks behind him with the football. Gets out of bed, says, send a warrant officer or ensign so-and-so. Come here. Open up the football. The only thing that's good, I think his name is Jared, the only good scenario that I could see is that hopefully with his son-in-law and his daughter being there, they will be able to calm him down. No, Dad, no, don't launch nuclear. But then, what does that say about us as a country? I mean, no, I don't like it took me almost a year and a half to get my cosmic top secret clearance. That's how long it took me. I was still off the coast of Lebanon on my ship, coming back and then and having to fly back
What
to
year
DC.
was that, by the way?
This was 1982. And this kid got, and his daughter, they got what it took me a year and a half to get with absolutely no training whatsoever. And part of me yells out, this is ridiculous. Are we the Somoza family? Some gangster family where you pass out the goodies to your closest relatives? I'm very resentful of that. I think every American should be. But by the same token, the other side of the coin, you got Donald Trump there in the presidency. It might prove to be a good thing for the peace of the world to have his son-in-law and his daughter there. Because like I said, they might be able to calm him down and talk him out of the nuclear option. And I think it is insanity. Not just that Americans have to live like that, but that the world has to live like that. And I'm not getting off the subject when I say this next item, and that is that pretty soon we're going to have to realize that there has to be some way for the rest of the world to make their feelings felt, about who we're running for president. And you will say, oh, well, who we decide to elect for president is not the business of Japan or Britain or Germany or Saudi Arabia or Latin America. Well, guess what? Wake up to the 21st century. The hell, it ain't their business. Yes, it is their business. Because we have to recognize the fact that with our global power, our global reach, whatever we do and say here affects the peace and stability of this planet. And Americans need to finally wake up and realize that, yes, what happens in the rest of the world in terms of who we elect for president, it does affect them. They do have a right to be interested. Now, I don't have a right to get into British politics because Britain does not affect the rest of the planet the way the United States does. No other country does, with the exception of China and the Soviet Union.
Russia.
That's what I said. I'm sorry. Well, Putin is acting like we're back in the days of the Soviet Union, so what the hell?
So is everybody else.
But that's what I'm saying.
Cold War is alive and well.
Right? But, yeah, how about that? But we have to realize that. And the American people, we really need to just grow up and stop being, many of us are just, and I know I'm going to catch up for saying this, but many of us are just too damn simple-minded. We don't understand the world. We have this wonderful, what do they say? Ignorance is bliss. We don't, the way that we think, well, I take that back because too many of us don't think. The chasm that you have with white Americans as opposed to Americans of color, it is disgraceful. After almost 500 years, we should know who the other is. That's what happens when you have a society that is trained to go backwards instead of forward. I find people of the 50s and 60s, even including the racism, I find those folks to be more attuned to what was happening in their life and in what they call their world.
Why do you think that was?
I'll tell you, one reason was because they have just come out of World War II.
Well, there was another thing going on in the late 60s, early 70s.
Well, you also had the space race. You had
the Vietnam War, in which
that's true too.
Which the young people who were subject to a draft, including college students once they graduated.
Yeah.
In fact, I remember when I joined the Peace Corps in 1963. When was that? When was Kennedy assassinated?
Well, he was 63. November 63.
And at that time, there was a lot of talk about putting the draft in. Now, I'd already been in the Navy, and so I was not, and I did, so I
You'd already done your thing.
I didn't have to, yeah.
Yeah.
But a lot of the young men that joined the Peace Corps at that time, they were graduating from college, and they were afraid that as the Vietnam War escalated, they would be subject to the draft. And now I remember, when I was in the Navy, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah.
And here you had a President Kennedy who was caught up in a situation in which the world came dangerously close to a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And that was President Kennedy.
I remember.
And I think that now President Kennedy certainly had a much better grasp on world politics than President Trump. And when he examined this whole situation in Cuba, he began to realize that maybe we should re-examine our relationship with the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we should reform
Uh-huh.
the CIA.
Mm-hmm.
What happened to President Kennedy?
Come on, I don't want you to get the reputation as being a
So anyway,
conspiracy
well,
theorist.
okay, so all right. Now, this thing about blaming the American public, I don't think that's quite fair. After all, most Americans get their information from the mass media, and the mass media promotes this kind of American exceptionalism, American imperialism, this fear of Muslims and the fear of immigrants and the whole thing, especially something like Fox News. But it's not; they're not the only ones. So that's where Americans get. Despite all of this, I think, and I've said this before, this shocks a lot of people. I think that by Trump becoming president, this actually is turning out. Trump, to me, is not the problem. Getting rid of Trump is not going to solve anything. Trump is an extreme example of the system in which we live. And so what he's doing is that people they can't help but see that this whole thing is entering such a terrible stage, not only politically and from our foreign policy, but from the climate change, the whole thing, that you are getting now a mass movement, like what happened in the 60s, of women, of people of color, of indigenous people. What we need is to wake up the white working class. What we need is for them to get over their prejudices about American superiority and racial superiority, because they are also going to be the victims of what's going on. And
Well,
as
Tom,
far
while we still have enough time left,
Oh.
let me say this. I look upon the American people, and I know that you spent a couple of years in, and that's good, because I believe that one of the problems that we have in this country is that not enough people have actually served this country. You look at someone like Trump's son-in-law. Basically, this is a kid that was born starting out on top.
Trump himself.
Yeah, Trump himself. Well, I have absolutely no respect for Donald Trump as a commander-in-chief because of the fact that this guy was able to go and get 6 deferments during the Vietnam War. And then, and nowadays he comes across always talking about his idea of patriotism. He had the nerve and the audacity to insult that Muslim family who had lost a son, captain in the United States Army, who gave his life to save the lives of his men. And a worm like Trump had the audacity to try and make light of those people and their sacrifice. See, Tom, I will tell you, and I spent a lot of time going through this country, living with people, almost dying with them, and I know the mentality, and many of them, the situation that they have is because of their own fault, not because of some guy from Mexico coming across the border. If you didn't like your situation, if you didn't like how people of your particular class was being treated, who tells you to go out and vote for the same people? Alabama, Mississippi, Tennessee. Why are you voting for people that are not fighting along with you to make some kind of progressive change in the lives of you and the people?
Well,
in your
I think that's
community?
one of the reasons that Trump got elected, is because people are stuck in this two-party box. They went through 8 years of Obamaism, and they realized that here we are. I mean, Hillary is a war hawk. In fact, I think she recently supported this Trump bombing of in Syria, and the economy under Obama really. The improvements, even though the stock market has gone way, way up, it really hasn't reached the working class. And so they got disgusted with the Democrats, and they figured, all right, Trump claims he's not in the establishment. He's not in the established leadership of the Republican Party. Let's take a chance and vote for him. Well, they're going to find out soon enough that nothing is going to get any better. And hopefully one of these days, the American people are going to realize that their salvation does not rest with either one of these two parties. But I would like to say one other thing about veterans. Last night, Turner Classic Movies had The Best Years of Our Lives.
Yeah.
Do you remember that movie?
Yeah, that's a good movie. Yeah.
Wonderful movie. 1945, what happened to these GIs when they came back. Now, veterans, I would say, are probably much more realistic when it comes to war than the American population is in general.
Yeah, definitely.
And another thing about Trump or any president, we assume that the president of the United States and his cabinet, they have the last word on what goes on in this country, particularly foreign policy. I dispute that. The president, regardless of whether he's from the Democratic or the Republican Party, they're beholden to the real power brokers in this country, the ones down on Wall Street, the ones that fund them, the ones that control the mass media. That's one of the reasons that Bernie Sanders didn't have a chance, because they were in control of the leadership of the Democratic Party, which made sure that Bernie Sanders did not have a chance to get the Democratic nomination, even though the polls showed that he probably would have beaten Trump.
Yeah, here goes the problem. Right. I believe that this past election, and we have veered off somewhat from Syria, but that's okay because this is a part of Syria.
Well, it's all connected.
I know now there are people who are crying, literally crying, over the fact that Hillary lost in the Electoral College. And I know that if we had Hillary as opposed to Trump, we'd be in a much better shape, especially working class people. Trump and his cohort, basically, they played, this is what they did. They played white working class America for suckers. And this has never been done in American history. You have people, for example, let's take West Virginia and Kentucky. They being white, or I should say mostly white, they were very easily reached by their inherent racism. Oh, well, Obama was just terrible. Oh, I hate that guy from Kenya, which also points to the fact of how uneducated many parts of our electorate really truly are. But what happens? Yeah, Obamacare is terrible. It's miserable. We need to get rid of it. And then what happens? After Trump gets elected, they're running around saying, yeah, now we can get rid of Obamacare. And then, like this one coal miner said, I come to find out that Obamacare is the ACA, and I like the ACA. But Trump is not.
Whatever happened to universal single-payer health insurance?
But Trump is going to take away my ACA as well as my Obamacare. And somebody had to show this guy, hey, Obamacare and ACA are the same thing. The guy also is a coal miner. Obama made special provisions for people who worked in coal mines because of the black lung disease. Those people will be taken care of. Their families will be taken care of in the event if something when something happened to them. And they voted for a guy they wanted to tear that apart. That's why we still have Obamacare.
Why did the Republicans decide to?
Because they have so many people out of their districts that were using Obamacare and did not want it touched.
That's one reason. I think there's another reason too.
Well, you give me it then.
Well, the other reason is that Obamacare is a big boon to the healthcare industry by making it mandatory, and you have to have whatever program you have that's to be halfway effective has to be mandatory. You just can't have it for sick people or senior people that have a lot. You have it for everybody. Otherwise, but and of course the healthcare system healthcare industry realizes that. So they made sure that this whole thing would be defeated anyway. Better to have Obamacare than to have single-payer universal health care insurance.
Now, the problem with that is that it took blood to get to Obamacare. Unfortunately, the powers that be are very strong, and it was hell just trying to get Obamacare. So we really do know the hell that we would have gone through to get single payer. But as I see, our time is rapidly running out, unfortunately. Don't worry, folks. He'll be back. I will make sure that he gets another shot at coming here. But we want to say thank you so much.
I want to thank you, too, for inviting me and for having a program in which all of these alternative views can be expressed.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for coming. And listen, this is Bob Gumbs of the Concerned Forum. You have a good weekend. Take care. Bye. You know what? They have to start, hopefully, they will begin to make these programs, instead of just 58 minutes, they'll start giving, hour and a half. Now, let me see if I can turn this off here. Hang on one second. I'll be right there.